everybody? Uneducated Economist here. All right, we got 3 people watching with 2 likes. Be sure and hit the like button when you come into the live stream by hitting that thumbs up. The YouTube algorithm will pick up the video, spread it around for more people to join in. Always more fun to have more people joining in to make the comment section with questions and comments to be more interesting. So thank you so much for doing that. Today we're going to be talking about the major mistakes that the Federal Reserve has made within their monetary policy. Now, if you've been following my channel for any length of time, you have heard me talk a lot about monetary policy coming from the Federal Reserve. And what's interesting about the strategy that I have tried to communicate coming from the Federal Reserve is so much different from what everybody else is talking about out there. The mainstream media has it incorrect. They got the narrative wrong. They got the strategy, the real factual strategy coming from the Federal Reserve wrong. They got it all wrong, everything. And so when you think about some of the articles and, just comments that come from some of these talking heads that are out there, they are misunderstanding what it is that the Federal Reserve was attempting to do. And it's not their fault. And I mean, this is really, I would have to say it's massive misunderstanding. Like, I don't know how else to describe it other than once the understanding or the belief is set, it makes it very difficult to then change that belief. So since most people are under the expectation of a particular idea, it's very difficult to then say, hey, well, that idea, although is accurate for the most part, is incorrect in the way of thinking about it because that is used against you. And so by understanding it in that way, it is literally the reason why they are able to get away with the things that they are doing. So now when I start to explain how the strategy really works, and you think about how it is that most people truly understand the Federal Reserve, and you realize that these 2 different understandings of what it is that's taken place could not exist if everybody knew what it was that the Fed was truly trying to do. Like, it just simply would not happen. We would not be in the economy we are today. The only reason why it exists the way it does is because nobody knows. And so when we think about it, when it comes to the Federal Reserve, the main thing that people are missing, you could go and ask 100,000 people who have any paying attention, if they're paying any attention to the Fed, to the economy, or even politics in general. If you were to go and ask 100,000 people, what is it that the Federal Reserve is attempting to do with the inflation? Everyone would say they are trying to get to a 2% target. Now, this is not exactly incorrect, but the 2% target that the Federal Reserve is trying to achieve is over the long run. And now this is where a lot of people get very confused about what it is that the Fed is attempting to do with their monetary policy in the inflationary scenario. So as most people are anticipating that the Federal Reserve is going for a 2% target, like inflation, the inflation number that they use, not the real one, because we already know that they lie about it, but the inflation number that they use, what most people out there are thinking is that once that inflation gets to 2%, they are going to try and maintain that 2% for a long time. This is what most people interpret when they hear the Federal Reserve attempting to get to a 2% over the long run. This is how they interpret it. They believe that the Fed is going to get to a 2% target and then try to maintain that target for a length of time. That is not correct. That is not what the Federal Reserve is attempting to do. And even if they were attempting to do that, they can't do it because they already tried to do that. They've been trying to do that since 2012, and they failed miserably at it. There is no reason to believe that they are going to be able to achieve that sort of strategy. They can't do it. But nobody knows that, or apparently doesn't think that. But that's really what most people have now internalized, is that that's what the Fed is attempting to do. The Fed is not doing that. The Fed has a long-run goal to have an inflation expectation well anchored at 2%, meaning that the people believe that. believe it out of the Fed, out of the economy, out of everything, that over the long run, 2% will be the target that the Federal Reserve is attempting to go for. However, if the Federal Reserve never achieves the 2% target or fails to achieve it, then they have an inflation expectation over the long run that may fall below that 2%. And that is the major problem for the Federal Reserve, is an inflation expectation that runs persistently too low rather than too high. That isn't my words. That's the words coming from John Williams. That speech was given November of 2018. So now, in order to anchor long-term inflation expectations, which is the real strategy of the Federal Reserve, that long-term inflation expectation, at that level, the committee seeks to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time, and therefore judges that following periods when inflation has been running persistently below 2%, appropriate monetary policy will likely aim to achieve inflation that is moderately above 2% for some time. Those aren't my words. Those are the words coming from the Statement on Long-Run Goals and Monetary Policy Strategies, and that was reaffirmed January 30th of 2024. This will change this year. The Federal Reserve is going through the process right now to restate the Statement on Long-Run Goals and Monetary Policy Strategies. But as of right now and over the last 5 years, this is exactly what they've been attempting to do, is to have an inflation expectation that is well anchored at 2%. Job done. How many people are actually believing that they are going for a 2% target? Everybody. If you believe that they are going for a 2% target and that they are working their way towards that 2% target, and eventually they will be at a 2% target over the long run, whether or not they actually have inflation down to the 2%, that is their goal. It's working right now. Everybody who is falling into that belief that they are trying to go for a 2% target is now in the belief system that the Federal Reserve was trying to create. It's working. All right? Now, as most people start to conduct themselves, they will then look at the Federal Reserve and their adjustment of the Fed funds rate as the main policy tool. This is mistake number 2, right? If we were to start listing mistakes, this is mistake number 2. Mistake number 1 is the 2% target, right? So understanding how it is that most people are going to end up conducting themselves because of this, right? Now, when you think about how it is that the Federal Reserve adjusts interest rates and what it is that people anticipate coming from that interest rate adjustment, you can see already how it is failing the people. It is failing the markets. It's failing the consumers out there. The Federal Reserve had promised at the end of 2023 that 2024 was going to be filled with rate cuts. How many people were of the expectation that there was going to be interest rate cuts to 0? Like they were going to take the Fed funds rate all the way to 0, emergency rate cuts. That they saw that the employment situation, the unemployment was going to rise and the jobs was going to go sour. And so the Fed was going to have no other choice but be forced into cutting rates. Didn't happen. We saw interest rates out there on the market. The U.S. 10-year came down. Mortgage rates came down, all off of the expectation that the interest rate cuts were coming to the future. Once they came, the exact opposite happened. Nobody was predicting that, right? Nobody came out and says, once the Federal Reserve cuts rates, you're going to see mortgage rates go up. Nobody thought that. I didn't see a single article stating that. However, when people ask me what's going to happen when the Federal Reserve cuts rates, I said, don't worry about the interest rate adjustment. That's not the main policy tool. The main policy tool is the words that they are using, and you see it working. All those words that they used prior to cutting rates lowered interest rates. Did anybody recognize it? No. Nobody thought about it as a credible threat. They just thought, well, that's just the way the economy is. All right? So understanding makes mistake number 1 being a 2% target that doesn't exist, because that's not what they're going for, but going for flexible average inflation targeting, or a flexible average inflation target over the long run. Mistake number two is the Fed funds rates adjustment being the main policy tool. It's not. It's their words. So those are the two major mistakes that most people are making right now within the economy, within their judging of what it is that they need to do for their business, for investments, for savings. They have these two major mistakes that are now rolling in their head that they think is reality. It's not. And it's important to understand it in that fashion. And so when I think about some of the things that you can do for yourself, you can start to understand that their words have more of an impact than the actual interest rate adjustments. Listen to the words. Listen to whether or not it's positive or negative, the communication that's going on. Think about what it is that's being stated that would then lower the interest rates, thinking that's a positive energy coming out of the statement, when all reality says is that if the Federal Reserve is lowering interest rates, that's a bad sign for the economy. But yet the markets take it as a good thing. And so understanding that that communication out there has a profound impact on the economy, has a profound impact on the markets, you can now position yourself appropriately knowing that it's the words that are doing it, not the rate cut. Everybody's anticipating the rate cut, but now you know that it's a communication about the rate cut that's more important, and how it is that the market is perceiving that information. Once you have done this and you start looking at it in this fashion and take the interest rate adjustment itself as a secondary to the communication about it, which most people don't do, right? Most people put the interest rate adjustment first, using the communication to talk about it as a secondary. But it's not. It's the exact opposite of that. This is why most people are getting it wrong, why most people are making the mistake. So once you have put the information in the communication about it first and how that impacts the economy, like don't take the information itself, right? Like a lot of times the communication about that information isn't even accurate, but think about how it impacts the economy itself or the markets itself, how people receive that information. That's the important thing, right? They could be talking, oh, we're trying to get it down to a 2% target or whatever. All that communication could be complete BS. But how it is that the people are receiving that information, that is very real. So again, when we look at this thing, you have to look at it for what it really is. That's the main policy tool, is the communication coming from the Federal Reserve and how they talk about it. And now the third thing that most people are getting wrong is that they think that the power of creating an economy that is a productive, saving nation comes from political environment. Again, nothing could be further from the truth. It is not politics that does it. It is you and me in our efforts and what it is that we do. And now, when we were a productive, saving nation, we were a strong nation. A strong economy is built off of production and savings. However, once you have moved into a higher standard of living, it becomes very, very difficult to compete against the world when they have a much less standard of living and willing to produce what it is that you are producing at a much cheaper rate. This is the problem that we now face, and to blame that on politics is very wrong. Again, nothing could be further from the truth, and it isn't me that is coming up with that theory. This is Cantillon's theory, dated hundreds of years ago, recognizing the same problem happening time and time again for thousands of years. Like Cantillon was describing this taking place literally thousands of years before he wrote the essay, recognizing it in his day and recognizing that it will happen again. And so understanding that a good, strong production nation comes from having a people with a lesser standard of living that is rising into that industriousness. The people themselves are becoming more efficient. They're becoming smarter. They're becoming more creative. And when they do that, they start selling those products to the world. The world sends us their money. We increase our standard of living, and we're no longer competitive. It's not a political action. It's cyclical. And if Cantillon can describe it time and time and time again, there's no reason to blame it on politics, because if you do, then you would have to also give credit to the idea that you can then vote somebody in who could fix it. And there is no fixing it because it wasn't them who created the problem. The problem came from a rise in the standard of living. It was the move into luxuries. It was the purchasing of foreign products. And again, that doesn't have anything to do with politics. That has everything to do with us as an individual decision that we had made. And so those three major mistakes that most people are now looking at when it comes to the economy is one of the reasons why it is that they fail, or that they feel that there is a problem, or that something needs to be fixed, or because they can't figure out how to make the right decision because they simply just don't know. Think about that. If you can't get the 2% target thing right, believing that the Federal Reserve is doing their best to try and get inflation down to 2%, not realizing that they need it moderately above 2% for some time, and that this is actually what they are trying to achieve. How is it that you're going to make decisions thinking that they're still trying to get it down? You think that they're still working on it. They're not. This is where they want to be. They're not working on anything except for maintaining this. So this is a very important thing to understand, especially when it comes to investments and savings or starting a business or something of that nature. This is incredibly important stuff to understand, right? They are not going for a 2% target, but going for 2% average inflation rate over time, which means that inflation is going to be moderately above 2% for some time. Very difficult for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. So again, take that into consideration. Understand that that's what's needed to be done to really understand the monetary policy, is that you have to think about it in that fashion. 2% over the long run, not a target that they're trying to achieve. Inflation rate moderately above 2%. And then again, when it comes down to conducting yourself with the information that you are reading or looking at out there, it's not the narrative that's being discussed out there, but the way that the people are embracing that information. What is it they're doing with it? They are taking this information and conducting themselves with it, but they got it inaccurately. Right? Think about how it is that the people are using this in a positive or negative idea. How is it that that narrative is creating that positive, negative energy? Okay? Think about it in that fashion. Don't look at the number. Don't think, okay, are they going to cut a 0.5% or 2% or anything like that? That doesn't matter. That part does not matter. If it mattered, then you would have seen interest rates on the mortgages come down. That's what people were waiting for. It didn't work out that way. So don't bother looking at it for it. Don't look for it that way, because it isn't going to work, right? It's just simply not going to work that way. All right, let me read some comments here. Hey, Cody, good to see you. Hit the like button. Yes, please do. All right, keep pressing the like button, people. It's the best way to support the channel at no cost to you at all. That's right, Brody. It really is the best way to support the Uneducated Economist. It takes you hardly any effort. Literally, you just have to go over there and just hit that button, and it's a wonderful way to support the Uneducated Economist. All right, boom. All right, 51st like. Good for you, Cody. Gold and crypto, and start a fun company that people give you fiat. I think that will cover it. Mine gold and crypto. I see. Hey, Benny. Okay, but he said he will fix it in 24 hours. No excuses. Are you talking about Trump? All right. Howdy, Hider. All right. 50%, 56%. Great to see you guys. But what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. It gets the people going. Okay, I'm not sure what you all talk about. Hey, Benny, welcome. Hey, Brody, thank you. All right, diversity, is that what it is? Making all the money? Diversity? All right, thanks, Cody. Hello, Brody. All right, and what gets accomplished with an above 2% interest rate over time? Oh, good question, Soundmind. Okay, so the reason why they need a 2% inflation rate over time that's elevated, the 2% target is really just a long-term inflation expectation. It's not reality. They don't ever have to have a 2% target. They can conduct themselves in a way that they could have a 2% average inflation rate over the long run with never once ever being at 2%. They could run 1% or 3% forever, right? Either being at one of these two places and running at 1% or 3% forever and still have a 2% average inflation rate over time. right? So the 2% average inflation rate over time is just an expectation for the people. Having an elevated inflation right now above the 2% is doing something that a lot of people aren't recognizing or communicating, and that is it's raising the neutral interest rate. And now again, this is getting very esoteric in the understanding of monetary policy, but the neutral interest rate is the rate that is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. It's neutral. Now the Fed funds rate is above neutral, which means that it is restrictive. It's a restrictive monetary policy when they have elevated interest rates, and the elevated interest rates being above the neutral interest rate is the restriction upon the economy. If you have an inflation expectation that is well elevated, especially one that's up around 2% or moderately above 2%, what that will do is over time is will start to raise the neutral interest rate. The rate that is the neutral interest rate would go up with the understanding that people would then demand a higher return on their capital investments, and their expectations of the elevated inflation would do that. So now as the neutral interest rate begins to rise, it makes it ever closer to the Fed funds rate, which then makes the economy less restricted. So with an elevated inflation expectation going into the future that is above the 2% target, you can raise the neutral interest rate. The Federal Reserve can sit on their hands, do nothing, and have the neutral interest rate get closer to the Fed funds rate, which is something that they have stated in the past, that they want to be at neutral. So they don't have to do any work at all. The work is being done for them by the people in their own inflation expectations going into the future that raises that neutral interest rate. They could find that that neutral interest rate would find them. This is the reason why they want an elevated inflation expectation, to raise the neutral interest rate. The neutral interest rate was very close to zero prior to the pandemic. Right? It was very close to zero. So if we ran into an economic downturn and the Federal Reserve dropped interest rates, the Fed funds rates to zero, to the lower bound, they couldn't get far enough below neutral to actually stimulate the economy because neutral is so close to zero. This is why their monetary policy had effectively come to an end. Right? A lot of people don't know this. Their monetary policy was failing at that point. And what I mean by failing is that they had no more control of stimulating the economy through the interest rate adjustments because they were at zero. It's over. This is why quantitative easing and the massive printing of money and the government spending taking place, because we as the people weren't going to go out there and borrow money to buy houses and cars and go on vacation, so the government had to do it. And if the government didn't do it, we would have failed. So the government went into massive stimulus spending, going out there with the shovel-ready jobs. Remember that back in the Obama administration? I love that one. Shovel-ready jobs, right? Anyhow, but this is how they now conduct themselves. Now, if they could get the inflation expectation rising dramatically, and start lifting that neutral interest rate. And if you can keep that going over time, it takes time to do this. You can't just do it for a couple of years. You got to do it for a long run, because that neutral interest rate isn't something that just moves easily, right? It takes an elevated like expectation, whether it's a below expectation or above. Over that long run, it will start to move that neutral interest rate around. Now, three main factors was provided to the bulk of the reasonings for the low neutral interest rate. Like, there was three reasons that this was mainly the problem, and that is because of the demographics issue, right? Too many old people, essentially. People retiring are not somebody who is going to be out there active, spending, stimulating, stuff like that. They're very much hunkered down, holding on, right? So demographics issue was a major problem, as an older population is less active within the economy. Global growth had slowed down dramatically around the world. And then the third problem that the low neutral interest rate was facing was the widening wedge between safe and liquid assets like U.S. Treasuries and corporate debt. Now, again, all these three reasons are very difficult to wrap your head around if you're hearing it for the first time. But when you go back prior to the COVID, prior to the pandemic, this is exactly what they were describing being the problem that the Federal Reserve was facing because of the low neutral interest rate. These three factors, right? The demographics, the global growth slowdown, and the wider wedge between safe and liquid assets and the corporate debt. After COVID, what do we see happen? All right, now, I'm not one who followed up on any of the statistics. I didn't watch the news. I didn't talk anything about like COVID and what it was really doing to the population, how many deaths and stuff like that. But I heard a bunch of old people died. Right? Again, like, I don't know. Right? I didn't watch any of that stuff. I didn't pay attention to it. But that's what I heard. So there was a demographics issue that had some relief take place during COVID. Global growth. Think about how much destruction of global supply chains took place during COVID, only to have a rebirth, new partnerships taking place. You see that global growth starting to take place again, right? The initiatives even coming from the Biden administration trying to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Like, this was a spark in this global growth that started to take place, or at least the destruction of the malinvestments out there, giving room for global growth to happen. And then what do we see with interest rates? Boom, almost to zero. Even corporate debt during the COVID pandemic found its way to almost zero in a lot of areas, as the demand for a return on capital investments was then moving into junk bonds. And the more people moved into those junk bonds, the lower that the yields went on them. So that widening wedge between the safe and liquid assets of U.S. Treasuries and corporate debt shrank dramatically during COVID. Now, it's widened since then, but during that time, they were attempting. The problem that they were facing back in the day of that widening wedge was becoming less wide, right? It was shrinking, that gap between the two. Recognizing these things as they were taking place, as it was happening, it was very difficult for most people out there, not knowing that was the problem that they were facing, that there was this neutral interest rate that was too low, giving them very little room to stimulate the economy. The fact that it was a demographics issue, global growth issue, interest rate, a wider wedge between the safe and liquid assets, these issues that were taking place, all of a sudden I was watching them just like getting relieved. And I'm thinking, holy crap, man, those are the three problems that the Federal Reserve was facing. And here they are somewhat going away. They're not going away, but like getting relieved. It was obvious to me. And I'm like, why isn't more people talking about this? I don't understand. Maybe it's just too difficult, or I guess if you just don't know, you don't know. All right, moving on. Wow, look at all this. Okay, we got Benny saying no need to get into the fact that they also have the jails. Do you happen to own any jails lampstands? All right. Many of us could sense a 1% interest rate or lower was not a good thing. Good for some people. Well, what I think is kind of crazy is how many people said that the Federal Reserve was creating so much harm by keeping interest rates low, all right, keeping them too low for too long. Blaming Biden for that. That was my favorite part. See, this is another thing, blaming Biden for that. Like, that's not who is in charge of federal fund. Like, they're not in charge of monetary policy. That administration, Biden administration, Trump administration, Reagan administration, none of those people were in charge of monetary policy. The Federal Reserve is. They act independently of it. And now I understand that people can compile a bunch of information that would very much disagree with that and say, oh no, look at this, man. Even from all these people who even worked at the Federal Reserve, right, at one point in their lives or whatever, say, oh no, they have this political view. They are putting that political view into their expectations when it comes to monetary policy. Okay, that's a great story. That's a great story to tell. I'm reading about this strategy going back 20 years. It doesn't have anything to do with politics. Not one single time have I read anything within anything that I have come across talking about the flexible average inflation targeting, moderately above 2%, lower bound, neutral interest rates. All that stuff has nothing, not a single statement, one, about politics. All right? The closest thing that I can find is that the Federal Reserve is in a somewhat wait and see pattern to see how much of the supposed credible threats of tariffs and stuff like that are coming. But nowhere do I see that they are actually conducting themselves with that credible threat in mind. I mean, like, I can't see it. Like, they've stated it, but I can't see it. Right? Everything that I see has a very long, decades long strategy behind it that makes very good sense once you see it. Right? But if you can't see it, or even worse, if you choose to see it some other way, right, then you'll never be able to take the information in, because the other belief is clouding it out. All right. AA, if the Fed, president, personal politics enter the discussion. I don't know. I mean, here's the thing. If the president actually had influence over it, then why would Donald Trump be saying he wants some? Right? Everybody was just saying, I think I should have a. He's like straight up said it before he's even like he part of his campaign promises or whatever. I should have a say in monetary policy. I know a lot about money. This is Donald Trump. I know a lot about it. I should have a say. I'm smart, right? Well, what is that admitting? He doesn't have a say. It's just straight up. Like, he just straight up said it. I don't have a say. I want a say. And so understanding it in that fashion, it was just like, okay, he wouldn't be asking for it if he already had it. So he obviously doesn't have it. That's why he's asking for it. All right. Deja vu. We wouldn't be here if the Fed was preemptive instead of being merely reactive. I don't know. I don't think they're reactive. I really don't. I don't think they're reactive. I think this is, I mean, how many times have I said it? They were going to keep interest rates elevated for an extended period of time. Extra high, extra long. Getting high and staying high. I mean, I've done a ton of videos on this. Right? And so, to me, they're not being reactive. Right? This is very much a strategic plan. They want to get the inflation expectation elevated. They need it elevated. They're using the credible threats of tariffs in their favor. Right? If they can get the inflation expectation, well, like if I'm surprised they ain't pushing it more. Right? Push that narrative out there even more. Because what that will do is it'll raise the neutral interest rate. And that will move it ever closer to the Fed funds rate. They like the idea. They're not being reactive to that. They're like, hey, encouraging it. Right? They're like, yeah, go for it, man. Give them hell, Trump. Tell them about them tariffs. Right? I mean, that's the way I see it. Because most people can't see it the way that from that angle, because they think the Fed is messed up. Right? They think that they screwed up, that they made a mistake, that they don't know what they're doing. Like Gunlack saying they're bumping around like Mr. Magoo. And I guess if I had made incorrect calls about the Federal Reserve strategy, I would be saying that too. Right? But I didn't make incorrect calls about the Federal Reserve, so I don't talk about them bumping around like Mr. Magoo, because I think that they're very strategic in what it is that they are doing, because they've stated it. Very much in like the brief moments that I've shown you here. Right? Today, I mean, I've gone deep into this stuff. It's just a few little bits that I've given you today. So, I mean, I don't think that they made a mistake. To me, this is a very well orchestrated plan that is using gaslighting as their policy. And it works. It works so well. All right, fundamental exercise. If the minimum wage increased at the same rate as the posted monthly inflation rate, I bet the monetary policy would be way different. Well, okay, David, that again is like, a very like, how do I say it, like fine-tuned idea of what it is that would be happening out there. The problem that we are facing is that we have a high standard of living. Like, you can throw all the politics and money in and all that other stuff. I don't care, right? You can throw all that stuff around and you can talk about it, and there's probably a lot of truth inside of all of it. But at the end of it, what it really comes down to is that we have an elevated standard of living. We are not competitive against other people out there who are producing products that we buy. Think about that. Other people are producing products that we buy. That means we send them money. If we send them money, then how does the new money come into the system? It comes from debt issuance. If there's an abundance of debt issuance that can take place, then you'll have separation between the rich and the poor. That's the problem. Right? And now, whether or not it's done through a silver mine bringing in new money, or it's debt issuance, or production of products and exporting those products out there to the world, if you have a continuous increase of new money, you will have a separation between the rich and the poor. How do you fix that? You can't. You can't fix it. The moment that you turn off the new money, everybody falls into poverty and misery. So keep the new money pouring in, and you'll have this ever-increasing separation between the rich and the poor, and people won't be able to buy a house and car and go on vacation or have the wife and kids and all the other stuff like they normally expected from their day job, because that's not enough. It's not enough to do it anymore. A good job sucks. In order to make it in this world today and that sort of idea, you have to be so goddamn productive against the rest of the world. It makes it to the point that people are just saying, what are you supposed to do? Just work 24/7? Yeah. I'm buying a house, right? You know how hard I have to work? You know how much time and effort and I have to, it's unreal, right? It's constant. It's a constant attempt to try. And so when people are sitting around going, man, we should figure out a way that the government can make it easier so my 9-to-5 job will then give me the ability to buy a house. Good luck. Good luck with that, man. Go sit around hoping and wishing and dreaming that shit will happen. It won't. Right? Recognize it for what it is. We are now moving into a state in this economy in which that the wedge between the rich and the poor is going to be so much that if you ain't doing something from the time that you were a teenager, even earlier than that, to try and get on the other side of the wedge, you're going to get buried. That's all there is to it. It's best to recognize this situation for what it is so that you can do something real about it. It's not impossible. There are so many ways to make money nowadays. Right? Before, you used to have to go and trade your time for dollars for everything. Now there's so many ways to make money. You can make money all over the place on the internet. Right? There's so many ways to do things for side hustles and extra, I love that, extra income. Right? There are so many ways. It's not impossible, but it takes a lot of effort. You have to constantly be doing it. There is no easy road. It isn't fair. Right? That's the other thing. It's not fair. It's not going to be fair. There's nobody you can vote for who's going to make it fair. Because the person that you vote for who makes it fair for you makes it unfair for that other person over there. So there's no fair. It's not going to be fair. It's better to understand it in that fashion and then say, okay, I can do something about this for myself. All right. Do you like your job? My kid quit his today. I get him. Do I like my job? Yeah, I like my job. There were some jobs in my life that I didn't like, but yeah, I do like my job. Working for somebody else isn't exactly like the coolest thing in the world, but then again, it's a lot of security involved with that. So, you trade freedom for security. I think that a lot of people nowadays give too much expectation to their 9-to-5 job, thinking that, this 9-to-5 job should provide me with everything that I need in my life. And that's just unfortunate. It's not going to be that way anymore. Right? There was a time that was the case, that a regular 9-to-5 average job, if you were disciplined, you didn't even have to be that disciplined, but if you were just somewhat aware of your situation and what it is that you were doing, that 9-to-5 job, just about no matter what it was, could provide you with a place to live and vehicle and food and all the other stuff. And I mean, it may not have been a great life, but it wouldn't be particularly hard to make it. It just make it good would be a little difficult. And even today, it's really not that hard to make it, right? Because there's so many opportunities to bring in revenue from so many different directions. So it's not particularly hard to make it, but it is hard to make it good. And that's the problem that I think a lot of people face. Right? No, I mean, nobody likes working for another person, right? Everybody wants to work for themselves, I would think. But if you use it to your advantage, right? I mean, my job provides with health insurance for me and the family. I got a retirement fund that the employer helps match. That's pretty cool. I got a cool group of people that I work with, spend my day with. I mean, there's some great things that happen from having a 9-to-5 job. That stability that comes from that. That gives me the opportunity to try things that may fail, but that's okay. I don't have to worry about failing in life. I just have to worry about making sure I understand why it is that I failed so that I can do the next right thing to make it right. But having that opportunity to fail without completely crashing can really be provided by a 9 to 5 job. So I don't knock the 9 to 5 job at all. Like, to me, collecting a W-2 is a very strategic way of going about things, especially if you're doing other things in your life, got other side hustles or businesses or something else going on. All right. Daniel says, Simon, you've said the credible threat theory explains the Federal Reserve strategy to influence the markets, and their goal is slightly above 2% interest over time. Will interest rates go up again this year? What difference does it make, bro? That's the whole point. Like, I mean, even asking the question after saying, hey, the credible threat theory explains the, and then asking the question if interest rates will go up is missing the credible threat theory all to begin with. It doesn't matter. Don't worry. Like, even we were just talking about this. This is mistake number 2 right now that is being faced. Right? Don't worry about the interest rate adjustment itself. That does not matter. Don't stress it. Think about the communication about it, whether that is positive or negative, because that's going to be the profound impact within the economy and the markets. Will that drive interest rates one direction or another? Absolutely it will. But it doesn't matter if the Federal Reserve cuts rates or raises rates, because the interest rates within the 10-year or mortgages or whatever is going to act very differently based on the communication coming from the Federal Reserve and how it is that the market receives that information. This is mistake number 2 right there. Don't worry about the rate adjustment. Don't worry about it. Listen to the communication. If the communication is positive or negative, how it is that the market is receiving that positive or negative information. Think about it in that fashion. When they're talking about the interest rate cuts and they're talking about how much they're going to do and all that other stuff, don't think about the number that they're talking about. That's not the important part. Listen to how it is that they are delivering that information and whether or not the market is receiving that information in a positive, negative light. That's going to be more important. That is what's going to give you the ability to make the appropriate decision for yourself. Right? Because even think about it. How many people asked me before the Fed even adjusted rates, are they going to cut? What's that going to do to mortgages? What's that? And I was just like, don't. And I tried saying it then. Don't worry about the rate cut. Think about the communication about it, because that's more important. Nobody wants to hear it, and it's not your fault, right? Daniel, I'm not trying to pick on you or anything like that. It's not your fault, right? This is the way that we have been conditioned, is the way that we were raised, it's the way that we have been taught. And we have a very difficult time looking at it any other way. Right? It's just like, it's like literally going against your belief system. And that's, and I know it's hard, right? It took a long time for me to even do it myself. I mean, I was somebody who followed the Federal Reserve very closely and politics very closely, and I knew these two were tied. I blame politics for everything. I blame the New World Order for everything. And once I started realizing, man, this is much different from what I had really understood it as, and started just basically wiping the slate clean and rebuilding my belief system, I could then find that the communication about monetary policy was by far the most important thing. I mean, it's not even me who says that. Let me see if I can find it here. Hold on. Nope, that's not it. I don't know. I may not be able to find it right away. Maybe is this it? No, that's the discount window. Communications about monetary policy. This is a speech that was given May 13th of 2024. I encourage you to go and read it. It was given by Phillips Jefferson. This is by far one of the most telling speeches about the credible threat, about how they use their words to communicate what it is that they want from monetary policy. It doesn't have anything to do with interest rate adjustments. This is all about communication. That's it. Right? And now, when we start going through some of these speeches, this is some of the things that you will read in here. In 1981, Karl Brunner, the Swiss monetary economist, called central banking an esoteric art and lamented central banks' inherent impossibility to articulate its insight in explicit and intelligible words and sentences. Impossible to do it. At the time, central banking wisdom dictated that monetary policy should say as little as possible. Some research of that vintage tried to rationalize this, quote, secrecy through the notion that monetary policy would be particularly effective if it surprised the markets. That's the way that they conducted themselves for the longest time. They would adjust interest rates over one night. Nobody knew that they were going to do it. You just woke up one day and boom, the Fed funds rate had been moved, and everybody had to get shocked and awed by the whole situation. And they said that was the best way to conduct policy, was through that secrecy. Later, they found that communication was a much better form. Goes on like this. Expectations became a focal point in academic and policy circles with the emergence of the new Keynesian models in the 1990s as a framework for monetary policy. In these models, aligning the expectation of decision makers in the private sector, that means the corporate managers, the investors, the hedge, all those people, right? The expectations of decision makers in the private sector with those of the policymakers, the guys at the Federal Reserve, the FOMC, the people who are in charge of monetary policy. Aligning the expectations with decision makers in the private sector and with those policymakers produced superior economic outcomes. Think about that. By aligning the credible threat. Mike Woodford, one of the developers of the new Keynesian model, put it this way: not only do expectations about policy matter, but very little else matters. Don't worry about the interest rate cut. Think about the communication about it. Right? Goes on to say here. Well, this is okay. So this is a part where in the speech right here, but I think it's pretty telling. They start going into how it is that they developed all these different communication channels, right? Before they didn't have any way of delivering that credible threat, right? Because they were secret. They didn't have any way of saying, hey, we're about ready to adjust rates. They didn't have that, right? They had to develop this way of doing it. They literally had to develop the communication channels. During the tenure of Chairman Bernanke, there was another burst of innovation in the way monetary policy was communicated. In 2007, at the first SEP, that's the Statement on Economic Projections, was published to convey systematically the economic outlook of the FOMC participants. They were saying, hey, here's some information about what we're thinking. Why don't you guys go read this information? Take a look at it. This is what we're talking about. Give you guys some insight on the future. In 2011, Chairman Bernanke started holding press conferences after every other FOMC meeting. In 2012, the Fed adopted an explicit inflation target of 2% and started publishing individual FOMC participants' views on the appropriate future path of the Fed funds rate, now famously known as the dot plot. See, they didn't even have it before that. They didn't have that dot plot. They say, man, how do we figure out a way to communicate with the people out there so they can better understand what it is that we need them to understand? I got an idea. Let's give them a dot plot. It worked too. Remember at the end of 2023? Man, they saw that dot plot and ran with it. The Federal Reserve has committed themselves to, 7 interest rate cuts or something like that. I can't remember exactly what they were saying. But everybody looked at that dot plot and thought, man, that's etched in stone. And I'm like, no, it's not. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything at all. What it means is the people's expectation, the FOMC's expectation of where it is that interest rates should be if things were to stay the same. These market conditions right now, if this was to be the same in 6 months, this is what we would be expecting our interest rate cuts to be, or our adjustments to be. Nothing ever stays the same. Ever has anything ever stayed the same, so there's no reason to believe that it would start. The dot plot is literally BS. It doesn't mean anything, all right? I mean, it gives you some idea of what it is the Federal Reserve is feeling at this exact moment. But in 6 months, it may not be the same way. All right. So I don't trust the dot plot for anything other than a general feeling of how they feel today. Like, wake up in the morning, how are you feeling? Oh, dot plot. Okay. I mean, literally. All right. During these years, Loretta, in her capacity as the research director at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, contributed to ongoing work on communications in collaboration with policymakers of the Federal Reserve Board. All right. This is how they do it. They made sure to do it that way. All right. Communicate it out here. I'm going to read this last little part, and then I'll put this away. Of course, this was an extraordinary time for monetary policy as interest rates in most advanced economies were close to zero. This is when the Federal Reserve was losing their monetary policy. Right? And when I say by losing monetary policy, ability to adjust interest rates during times of downturn, during times of economic stress, that monetary policy had come to an end. It failed them. They could not adjust interest rates anymore because they were at the lower bound of zero. They weren't the only ones. All right, let me go back. Of course, this was an extraordinary time for monetary policy as interest rates in most advanced economies were close to zero following the global financial crisis. The FOMC employed forward guidance, right? Credible threats, signaling, jawboning. They employed forward guidance, explicit communication about the future path of policy rate as a key tool. Forward guidance is the key tool. Right? This isn't me saying this. This is directly coming from Philip Jefferson of the Federal Reserve, talking about the communication, talking about how it's more important than the actual interest rate adjustments. Right? Expectation is more important than very little else matters. As a key policy tool with the unprecedented situation, the research community have found that such forward guidance could be very effective in the context of the new Keynesian paradigm. This isn't me, guys. I'm not inventing this stuff, right? I didn't make this stuff up. I'm not assuming. None of that. All the rest of the economists out there are making it up. They have to be, because it's not the truth. If it was the truth, they would be communicating the things that I am communicating. And I'm not trying to say they're lying. What I'm trying to say is they are very mistaken. Right? Their assumptions are wrong. Their predictions were wrong. And when they were wrong and their assumptions are wrong and their predictions are wrong, what they look at and what they say is that they're fumbling, they don't know what they're doing, they're acting like Mr. Magoo, they're all this other stuff. They give excuses for their own incompetence to understand what it is that's truly happening out there. And I don't blame them. I'm not trying to be like an arrogant, cocky or anything else like that. I'm not trying to be that way. And I'm if I sound that way, I'm sorry. I don't know. I mean, I don't even want to apologize for it because I'm not sorry. I mean, this is not something that you screw around with. This is, every decision that we make every single day, our subconscious behaviors from the belief systems that we have developed, this is incredibly important. This is survival. And when I see people out there who are supposedly experts in charge of hundreds of billions of dollars and having the belief that the Federal Reserve is doing something that they're absolutely not doing, it's just mind-blowing. It absolutely just blows my mind to think that. And how it is that I could be sitting here in this old 2001 S10 that's all beat up talking monetary policy in a way that nobody else is delivering. It's just, I don't get it. But I'm not going to give it up. I mean, this is truly what's going on. And if it's, just 194 people right now who are getting the information, who are internalizing it so that they can make the best decisions for themselves, that's perfect. That it would be absolutely perfect, because it's all about those who are truly wanting to do something for themselves and not understanding that it's not going to be somebody else's efforts out there that are going to change our lives. We know that, right? What time is it? Man, I'm really going off today. All right, Trash Can Man, great to see you up in here. If anybody could pay Trump enough money to get him to be on board, it would be the Fed. On board with what, man? I mean, on board with what? They're doing exactly what it is that they want to do. I'm bored with, like, what do they need Trump to do? It was like, Trump, you want to get on board? No? Okay, that's fine. I don't care. I mean, like, I don't think they could care. Uh, they dumped all the helicopter money on top of wildfires. Repo lots are full, and so are the pre-foreclosure rates. Deflation is coming in asset prices, deflation in consumer goods, inflation in commodities. All right. I don't care what you drive. The info is what it is, especially if it's not a popular to say. It's not. Listen, you know how hard it was to come out on my channel in the midst of rampant inflation and basically say that this is all due to a supply chain breakdown and has very little to do with the monetary policies of the Federal Reserve. And you know how much punishment that I got in the comment section for saying that, and then used lumber as the perfect example for what it was that I was describing, and it worked out exactly the way that I had described it. Nobody wants to recognize that, right? I mean, you guys do. But out there, I'm looking out there on the mainstream, listening to people out there, and they still, like, I still don't see it. And so it's like, fine. If you don't want to see it, then don't see it, man. Turn the blind eye towards it. I mean, it's all right here. I mean, I've got, I don't know how many. Well, it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, well over a dozen speeches right here in front of me describing exactly how the credible threat theory works. Okay? All these people out there talking about how they screwed up and messed up and don't know what they're doing, and that they seem to think that they know better than the Federal Reserve and how monetary policy is supposed to be conducted. And then I'm thinking the whole time, I was just like, yeah, but you keep talking about interest rate adjustments. You're not talking anything about the credible threats. You're not talking anything about the signaling, the forward guidance, and how kind of impact that has on the economy. Nope, you just seem to be stuck on the interest rates and that they got that wrong. All right. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is like, God, you hear these guys? You hear it? They got that inflation expectation really rampant, man. They're in the background going, trying to high fives, man. They're like, yeah, we did it. Good forward guidance. Good old signaling. All right, general question to all Americans. Who is optimistic? Should Trump lower personal income tax? Yeah, he should. And we shouldn't be paying taxes at all. All right. Simon, what changed in the period between not sure when exactly, maybe the 80s, and today, which means that now people won't go borrow money to purchase houses, cars, and so on if the rates drop? It's not so. What the major problem that we face now is that really the monetary policy had come to an end once they had hit the lower bound of zero, but that was going to take place back in the early 2000s. They recognized this situation. See, typically the Federal Reserve would want to lower interest rates around 5%. And if you have plenty of room to adjust interest rates from 5%, then, the whole idea of running into the lower bound is just not even a concept, right? You don't even think about it. So from the early 80s, when the Fed funds rate was up, around 15% or so, this gave them all kinds of room to move, right? So they would lower, they would raise, they would lower, they would raise, try to fight the inflationary scenarios or whatever, deflationary, lack of employment or something that's happening. They would lower interest rates, try to stimulate the economy. And they gave them plenty of room to move. The only problem was, is if you go and you watch the interest rates, they were ticking down, ticking down, ticking down for the 30 years. And then eventually got to a point where they're like, guys, we're going to run into the lower bound of zero. We're not going to be able to lower rates anymore. And this is going to be a major problem for us. We're not going to be able to stimulate the economy during a downturn, massive unemployment rising or something of that nature. We're not going to have any room to adjust rates because we're going to hit the lower bound of zero. Now, if we could go negative, that would be a different story. But if we go negative, then cashless society would have to be there because everybody would just start pulling their money out of the bank as opposed to taking a negative yield on their savings. So they knew that hitting the lower bound of zero meant that it was an end to their monetary policy. Right? So that was the major difference that had taken place. With an elevated Fed funds rate, it gave them that room to move, right? Drop interest rates 5%, that lowering of 5%. And it wasn't really so much about getting the people out there to go consume, because that was a major part of it. That consumption was what really got the corporations going. But it was about government, it was about corporate management investing, right? To get the corporate management to start investing. And by investing, by borrowing money and investing, they would start buying equipment, buildings, hiring people. And that's the part that the Federal Reserve was really looking for when they have a downturn in the economy, is to get the unemployment to come down, or the jobs to increase, right? To get the employment to increase. And that's really what they were attempting to do: lower that interest rates 5%. Corporations would go out there, borrow the money, hire people. Hiring people, go out there, they start spending. That extra spending, supply demand imbalances, inflationary pressures start to come from it. So, I don't know, does that answer the question all right? Excuse me. All right. Why should anyone buy bonds with a negative real rate? Now, that doesn't make any sense, and I agree, Monkey, but I love the name too. But we have to understand that it's a speculative asset at that point, right? It's not something that they're looking to get the return on yield. Like, we look at it as just like, no, when we buy a bond, we're anticipating that we're going to get a return on that bond, that interest rate, that yield that we get off of it. And so when we think about buying a bond, we're thinking about it as an investment, but it's also a speculative asset, much like buying a chunk of gold, right? And when you buy a chunk of gold, what you are anticipating is that it's going to go up in price, and that you would be able to sell that gold for a higher value than what you had paid for it, right? The greater fool theory. Now, it's not meaning that you're a fool. It's just what they call it, right? A lot of people get insulted when I say it that way. But it's the greater fool theory, thinking that, okay, I paid this much for it, then in the future I'll sell for a higher price. Somebody else is going to pay more than what I paid for it. Okay. Bonds work in that same scenario, right? So now when we think about a bond, right, it has a fixed yield or a fixed interest rate to it. So, excuse me. So let's assume that we have a 10-year bond here in my hand, right? This is the speech. This isn't the speech. This is the play that I'm doing out at sea, right? This is the script. All right. But we're going to pretend that it's a bond. And now this bond has a face value of $100, and it has a bunch of coupons along the bottom of it. They call them coupons because once a year I could tear one of those things off and go and cash it in. That coupon would have an interest to the face value of it, and we're going to assume that it's 10%. So once a year I could tear off one of these coupons and go and cash it in for $10. $100 face value, 10% yield or 10% interest coupon. Tear it off once a year, go get my money for it, right? Nothing changes about the bond. Nothing, right? Not how much it pays, not the face value, not the interest rate. None of that changes. It stays the same no matter what. The price that I can pay for it can go up and down, right? So now if I pay less than $100 for it, then the interest that I get paid off of it is still 10% from the face value. But at the end of the bond, if I cash, hold it till maturity, cash in all those coupons, cash it in for face value, I get a higher yield than what it actually says I would get because I paid less than $100 for it. If I pay more than $100 for it, then the yield that I get at the end of it would be less, right? Even though I'm cashing in all the rest of the coupons at $10, a piece, and the $100 face value, that stays the same. But the price that I had paid for the bond was higher, meaning that at the end of it, the amount of profit that I had made off of it had come down. So the yield falls as the price goes up. Now, it can get to a point where there's so much demand for these bonds, especially when you got like quantitative easing, you got government, or you got the central banking system promising to buy the government bonds. When you have such expectation of demand going into these bonds, then you have a speculative asset that starts to take place. People are anticipating that there is going to be a central bank buying these bonds. They buy them ahead of the Federal Reserve. The more people who are buying them, right, like any supply-demand imbalance, you have a price that starts to go up and the yield starts to go down on these bonds. Well, the price can go up so much that the yield actually goes negative, And this is the reason why somebody would be willing to buy a negative interest bearing bond or a negative yielding bond. It's not a negative interest bearing, it's a negative yielding. The interest rate might still be 10%, but because the price that you've paid for it has now driven it up, that even if you held it to maturity, you would not get back as much money as you had spent on it. And again, people would think that that doesn't make any sense. I wouldn't touch that thing. But if you have somebody over there who's promising to buy it, well, then, you're not really looking at what it's going to give you as far as an interest rate or a yield. You're just looking at the price that you paid and the price that he's going to pay. And if that price that he's going to pay is going to be more than what you had paid, that's a speculative asset that you're willing to buy and sell, regardless if it has enough interest rate to achieve, or even if the interest rate on it is gone negative, or the yield on it is gone negative. Did I explain all that right? It's a difficult thing to understand, but once you get it, once you understand it, it does make sense. It doesn't make sense from any kind of logical point of view, but it does make sense from the quantitative easing, where the governments are then issuing out a bunch of debt and the central bankers are buying it, basically unfazed at, 50, $60 billion a month. They're like, hey, we're just going to buy this regardless. Well, then all of a sudden you have a bunch of market participants who jump in and start playing that game. And as the more participants who come in, starts driving the prices up, the yields go down and eventually go negative. All right. Treasury bonds bought by other countries are literally doubling down on interest for 8% on USD purchasing. All right. Pension and retirement funds need to grow their accounts to keep up with inflation. They can't just sit on cash. They stripped out natural gas and electricity from the CPI last month, car insurance in 2022. Well, yeah, they take out all the stuff that goes like, crazy wild and fluctuations so that they can get a better understanding of what inflation is. None of it's accurate. All right. I mean, we can wish and hope and dream and pray that they do it another way, that they say, hey, you need to judge inflation like the way that you did it back in the 80s or way back in the day or whatever. We can tell them to do that. We can even look at it for what it really is. Doesn't matter. Like, none of that stuff matters. What matters is what they are looking at and how it is that they are going to conduct themselves based off of what it is that they are looking at. I don't agree with most of it. Right? I don't agree with the employment numbers that they're saying, the inflation numbers that they're saying. I don't agree with any of that stuff. And I gave up on it a long time ago from the government basically stating that they were going to lie about the numbers. FASB 56, right? I did a video on it, legal lies. FASB 56 was one of the few people on the internet who actually even talked about it at the time. But the government straight up came out and said, for national security reasons, we cannot give you the real numbers. They're close. They're good. You can use them for your investments, for, your business practices, whatever it is you got going on. But they may not be the real numbers. We have to hide those for national security reasons. Once I heard that, I'm like, yeah, they don't work for me anymore. Like, I can't look at these things and think maybe they're okay or they may, I don't look at it that way anymore. It's obviously they're all lies. And so if that's the case, then there's no point in even saying, hey, they looked at it this way before and they cut this all out and they can just go over there and just write it on with a crayon as far as I'm concerned and say that's what it is. And I'd be like, all right, cool. Right? I mean, because it's like, you already said that you're going to lie about it anyway. So what difference does it make? You can put gas in there or not. I don't care. All right, venture capital groups. I missed that one. Venture capital groups reach today's sort of signals the separation has occurred, in my opinion. All right, if real inflation is 10% and the bond yields 5%, it's a 5% loss. Soft default. Why even think about them at all? Yeah. I think it's not, okay, that's a good question. Why even think about it at all? Well, I think, again, it's really important to understand what it is that's happening in there through the market's expectations and perceptions, right? You can see the interest rate adjustments being moved in the 10-year based off of the market's expectations and feelings. This is very useful information. Now, whether or not it's accurate or real or whatever, that 10%, that number, I don't know, all right? That part, I don't, okay, I don't know, all right? But the overall general feeling can be found within it. And so since that is how they are using monetary policy is through that positive negative feeling about the information that they are being delivered, not the actual number, right? That's hard to let go of. I know it's hard to let go of the numbers, but you got to let go of the numbers and just use the numbers in a way that says, is this positive or negative from the communication that they are delivering? All right. Ask yourself that question. Is this a positive or negative delivery of information that they are talking about? Because that is the monetary policy, not the number that they're talking about. Don't worry about that part, right? I mean, it might seem important to you. It's not. I mean, it could be important to you. I'm not saying it's not important to you. It very well could be important to you. It's not important to monetary policy. All right. What's important to monetary policy is how you're receiving the information. That is the most important part. I'm going to continue to hammer this. I'm going to continue to hammer this because this is exactly, I mean, I'm trying to say it right here with Jefferson's speech, right? This is how the Federal Reserve is doing it. They're not like, people say, oh, no, they're just lying about that. And it was like, who? To me? They're lying to me? Nobody else seems to be talking about this information except for the uneducated economists. So they developed all these 12 speeches, talked about all this stuff, went to all these different areas all over the globe to deliver these speeches, and they did it all so that they can confuse me. Yeah, I don't think so, right? I mean, I don't think I'm that important. I'm drinking water too, Simon, yeah? So Freddie asked about New Year's resolutions a couple of weeks ago, right? Before the new year. And I said, yeah, this is when people try to make a change in their life that they commit to and stick to. And, you know, from that point on, just like live it differently. And he says, my New Year's resolution is to drink more water. I thought, you know what, kid? That is probably the best one I've heard. That is probably the best one. And he's sticking to it, too. All right. Do you think crypto is going to be the new stock market? No. Well, I mean, I don't want to say no because there's probably going to be some pretty good stuff that comes out of the crypto, like, projects that are happening out there. So in that sense, I think like the .com kind of era of things where people were like, what the hell's going on here with all these .com companies and businesses that are starting up? Nobody knew Amazon was going to be the one when they were in their infancy, right? So I think something like that could be happening within the crypto markets right now as well, right? Nobody knows which one of these altcoins is going to be the Amazon of them all. Most of them are going to fail. Right? Most of them are going to fail. And what I mean by that is just like this not be very popular because it's all about networking effect, right? Things that are already so well communicated out there amongst the globe, Dogecoin, right? I mean, it was started off as a joke. They didn't even like, the guy who developed it was just like, no, this is it's just a joke. It's not, it's not meant to be anything. And the Reddit community was just like, no, it's something to us. And they just kept it. And now everybody's all into it, right? Not everybody, but a bunch of people are. And so that networking effect that comes from cryptocurrencies, that's not going to be possible in all of them. It's only going to be in the most popular ones and the ones that are actually, doing something. So. All right. It is tokenized stocks. I can kind of see it. Yeah. Everything's going to get tokenized at some point. If that's like the question, like I believe that's going to happen. How long that takes before before everything is actually tokenized, right down to our pay or whatever. I couldn't tell you, but I feel the process is kind of underway at this point. So. They've continued to pump a lot of liquidity into the markets at the same time. The BS us all talk is cheap, as they say. All right, Yui, is the Cantillon effect something that only happens in a free market economy? If so, how do we make peace with the benefits of the invisible hand theory? This is the thing, like the Yui. Sorry, the Yui. Sorry, my leg's cramping up. The idea behind the Cantillon effect, right? Like I think the major problem that most people end up facing from the Cantillon effect was due to the fact that they had moved into luxuries. Like you can see it within your own self, Like you don't even think about the country or a particular region or something like that. Think about it just on an individual, as just you, right? And the Cantillon effect can run through just you, in your own personal economy. Right? Think about it from a young age. You're 18 years old. You have no skills, nothing going on, whatever. You get a job working for, a contractor. You're building houses, and you're basically moving lumber around. You're sweeping up. You're picking up. You're doing all the laboring stuff around. But the longer you're on the job site, the more they have you start to do things that are more in the carpentry aspect, and you start building. Well, once you start building, you become more valuable. You're becoming industrious, right? Just like any rising nation or region, the more industrious you are, you start being productive, you're going to get new money. Now, that new money that comes in, what ends up happening from that? Well, most people who end up with new money, you're a young man, 18, going into 20s or whatever, and you're starting to earn a little bit more income. What do, right? Well, you rent the apartment, drive a nice truck, you eating out and hanging out, you're doing all the stuff. Well, those are luxurious experiences that's taken place because of that new money that's come in. And this is typical of most people. And they don't look at it as a bad thing. And it's not a bad thing. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's just an is. It's just what people do, right? You go out there, you work, you earn the money, you want to enjoy the money, you start buying things that you enjoy, right? So this is the actual problem. Because once you start enjoying that new money, what you are end up doing is you're creating a situation in which that you either have to maintain that level of new money coming in, right? Or you have to figure out a way to get more new money to come in. Right? Now, had you not raised the standard of living and took that new money and invested it back into production and savings, eventually what will end up happening from that is that investment in production and savings will then make you a stronger individual because you will have production and savings that is now paying you the investment of that. But instead, you moved into luxurious experiences. So now this is very difficult to maintain. There's two different paths that we could have gone down. This is the same thing that most nations end up facing. Right? Is the exact same situation that they could have moved into production and savings, right? Like they were doing originally when they were becoming industrious. Once they have increased that money, increased that savings, instead of moving into the luxurious experiencing of raising their standard of living, they should have moved into more production and savings. Most people don't do that. Now, if we have a government that recognizes the problems that will come from the rise of the standard of living, the importing of foreign production, if there's a nation that recognizes it, think about the efforts that they have to go through in order to prevent that sort of situation from actually happening. They have to take control of the production. They have to take control of, your standard of living. They have to take control of all these things so that you don't behave in a way that is typically human nature that would then create the problems that we now face in places like here in the United States, Detroit for a great example, right? Producing all these wonderful vehicles to distribute out there to the rest of the world, eventually failed them, and the town lost all the new money coming in. So this is the problem that's faced, right? What can a government do about it? Well, they can put their boot on the face of the people and say, sorry, man, you can't go and enjoy it. Though if you do, it'll ruin the whole thing. Can't do it. Right? So now I don't expect this country to do that. I don't expect people to vote for somebody who's going to do that. I expect me to understand that this is the situation we are now in so that I can make appropriate decisions for me and my family. But to think that there is going to be some way that they can fix that problem, the fixing of the problem is a boot on the face. Saying, hey, work really, really, really hard, but don't get to enjoy any of it. And do it for the good of the country. Right? How do you fix that? You can't fix it. Understand it for what it is so that way you can position yourself appropriately. All right, get rid of Social Security so we can save for our own retirement. Where do you think inflation will go after that? again, that's a hypothetical situation that I just don't, anticipate happening. Like me personally, I have zero expectations of Social Security. Like zero. I have none. The way I look at it is my old people tax. Like there's an old people tax on my check that I pay. And that way, I don't want to see all, people, Social Security recipients. I don't want to see them on the streets and suffering and trying to figure out how it is that they're going to find their next meal. I don't want to see that. Right? So that Social Security thing that's supposed to be like, me contributing to my future. Okay, good one. Right? No, that's the old people tax, right? And so, maybe if I'm 65 years old or whatever and it's still out there, hey, right on, I get my shot at it. I really have pretty low expectations that that's actually going to happen. So I don't even think about Social Security. Right? I have my own plans for my own retirement that, I don't know if it's doing too well, but I'm doing my best considering that I got an incredibly late start at it. Right? But my expectations of Social Security, none. Gone. Don't have any. All right. It's not the individual that is overspending, it's the state that is overspending. Well, okay, Legend. That's that's blaming the external. It's not, right? It's the individual who's doing it. We as individuals, we make up this country. It is our decisions that we have made every single day that put us right where we are today, right? And we can blame government, that's fine, but then you're going to blame the external. And by blaming the external, what you can do is then try to use that blame of them being the fault. Then you can then, now you have to assume that you can vote for somebody who can fix it. All right. I mean, if it's their fault and they screwed it up and they did all this overspending and all this other stuff, then there's got to be somebody out there who can reverse the problem. And there's not. And it's not going to happen that way. You understanding the problem can then now position yourself appropriately to deal with it. Now, I understand that the things that you have been doing, I'm talking to you personally, but just saying in general that the things that you've been doing is probably not working out too well. So therefore you want a government or an administration to start doing things in a way that says, yes, what I am doing is appropriate and it's working. But it doesn't, that's not it. That's not how this works. It's up to you to figure out what it is that you can do that is different, that will give you the ability to kill it. Because there's people out there right now who are killing it. Right? Oops. All right, Monkey, why do we need taxes when they can just print? Why do the poorest pay the highest percentage in taxes? Because they're taking your time. I don't think anybody really realizes that's what taxes are. It's taking your time from you. That's the only thing that everybody has that's almost the same. Right? Like, I mean, people aren't going to be on the planet as long as other people, right? We all have an expiration to us. But for the most part, your hour is not any longer or shorter than my hour, right? And when you are paying taxes, they're taking your time. All that time that you had acquiring that money, like anytime they ever take any money from you, it's taking time from you. And that's the way to look at it. Taxes are essentially the proof of your time in slavery. And the poorest people pay the most because they're the ones who are most enslaved. Now, you can become less of a slave by getting out of the debt burden, right? Paying interest on debt. Start moving into property ownership and capitalism, being a capitalist, right? People who blame capitalism, saying it's the problem, are the same people who are suffering in slavery, right? Hoping and wishing and dreaming and praying that there's going to be an administration who's going to say that their personal decision making was the appropriate one, by hiring somebody into leadership that is going to then create a situation that says, yeah, all those decisions that you made, whether they were piss poor or not, were the right ones. Like, this is what I think a lot of people anticipate. You can live independently of the state. Capitalist, property ownership. Right? Those are the ways you do it. Start from an early age. Simon, you are in fine form today. Keep up your good work. I love your confidence and delivery. Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. And well, it's easy to be confident if you truly believe it, right? Like if I didn't truly believe what it is that I was saying, you guys would be able to recognize that. You would see it. Like you wouldn't be able to even say, "Hey, man, you're confident in what you say." You wouldn't be able to hear that in my voice. You wouldn't hear it in the tonality, the words that I use, whatever. This is truly what I feel and what I believe. This is what I have learned. This is what I am sharing with you guys. And I mean, I understand that at times I can tell jokes and then, it can be funny or entertaining or something like that. This is a very serious matter. It's very serious to me. I was at a point in my life that I thought that I was going to be on the streets. Seriously, guys. Like, I mean, I thought that I was going, like, I didn't know what was going to happen with my family, with the kids. Like, I had no idea. It was, it was not a pleasant place to be, right? And knowing that I can make a difference, that anybody can make a difference, is knowing deep down inside that there was some sort of change that had to happen in order for me to now conduct myself in a way that was going to be more appropriate. I had to figure that out. And the more I started diving into it, the more I started realizing that, man, most people out there are seeing it incorrectly. I know, I was one of them. It was one of the reasons why my life was deteriorating as bad as it was because I was seeing it so incorrectly, inaccurately. Like the stuff I was looking at was, and that's the problem. It was factual. The stuff I was looking at was facts. Right? It was the meaning that I was giving it all. You can look at this same event as being one of the most evil intentions ever taken place. At the same time, the opposite side of it thought it was one of the most holiest things that they could ever have done. Think about that for just a minute. It's all about the meaning that you give it. This information is not deteriorating your life. It might be heavy, it might be hard, it might be difficult, but it's not deteriorating your life unless you give it the meaning of that. If you give it a meaning that says, man, this is heavy, this is hard, this is very difficult. How do I use this information to better myself? That is how you give it meaning, right? How do I condition myself, my family, so that I can use this information for my benefit, not for my deterioration, right? It doesn't matter what the information is. It doesn't matter what the facts are. It's all about the meaning that you give behind it. And so understanding that from the very get-go then gives you the ability to now use all the information that you got in a very positive form. I mean, sometimes my delivery comes off very aggressive and, somewhat arrogant or whatever, especially when I'm, feel frustrated about some of the things that I'm seeing out there and I'm trying to deliver this information that I feel like a lot of people are just missing or not hearing. Even inside of that, all that, it is me being very honest with you. Right? It's me being honest with myself on this. This is not me kidding myself or trying to convince somebody to buy a product from me. And this is true, honest delivery of information that I feel, that I believe truly from inside. Right? And then, like I said, if I didn't do it that way, then you would recognize it and you wouldn't be here. All right, thoughts on sticking it to creditors if you're young, dumb, and way down on debt? Okay, night term 10, terrible idea. I defaulted on a loan for a house, let it go into foreclosure, and it took 10 years out of me, destroyed my credit. I I feel that that was one of the worst decisions that I have made that put me in a very compromised, like, retirement, was because I basically just walked away from that. 10 years is a long time to make up for. During that 10 years, I could have been doing so much more. So, is it a strategic default that I went into? Well, it was because I just didn't feel like I had any other choice. At the end of it, I learned a lot. I don't think I would have this channel. I don't think I would be here. I don't think I would be doing a lot of the things that I was doing right now had I not experienced the pain from that. Like, that's what I grew from, right? Anytime you have ever experienced pain, think about it. You're about ready to grow, right? And especially if you learn the lessons from it, then you're really growing. So painful experiences are there for a reason. They're there to teach you the lessons that you need to learn so that you can grow as a person. I know that's what happened to me. Like if I didn't experience that foreclosure, I don't think I would have gone off, tried to figure out what was going on within the economy, learn about mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps and all that other stuff. I never would have experienced any of that stuff. So I don't look back at it as a bad thing in my life, but I certainly wouldn't recommend it. 10 years, that's a long time. That's a long time to try and make up for. You know? And I'm still, like, I feel like I'm still making up for it. You know, I don't think people realize, like, how deep of a hole that you can get yourself into and how long it takes to get out of it. Like, you know, I mean, to me, it wasn't even that bad. I know people who had some really serious circumstances. I just, like, I think about the situation because, don't compare yourself to other people either, right? But I looked at like where I was at one point, and I just felt like, man, it can't get any worse than this. And then I look at some other people, and I'm like, holy crap, that wasn't that bad. That for me, that wasn't bad at all, compared to what they have going on. But don't do that, right? Don't compare yourself to other people in that fashion. Don't compare somebody else's success to your success. I don't look at other YouTubers out there with, less subscribers making 5 times more money than I am as being more successful than I am at this channel. I feel what I am doing right now is absolutely the most appropriate thing that I could possibly be doing. There's probably more I could be doing. In fact, I know there's more I could be doing, but this is what I'm doing. This is the right path. This is the journey that I want to be on. Right? I don't like if I had $100 million or something like that, I wouldn't be doing this. Okay? I mean, that's what I think about. It was just like I love being out here on YouTube on these live streams talking monetary policy. I love doing this thing. If I had $100 million, I wouldn't be doing this. And so what would I be doing that I love if I love this? Yeah. There's no situation which is so bad that it cannot be made worse. That's so true, man. Getting rich off of air isn't rich. Getting rich. Well, what does getting rich mean? Ooh, mandate. Someone of authority says so. Simon, what you're talking about is why a religious mythology, hell is a bottomless pit. Whatever happens in life, don't stop brushing your teeth. Yeah, that's true. I got really bad stained teeth. I drink so much coffee. It just it stains my teeth bad. All right. If only some DEI hire could tell me what to do every minute. Hi, sir. With the RRP almost drained and Yellen stating that the Treasury General account will have to suspend debt issuance, what will be the effect of this? Well, we have to think, I don't know. We've gone into extraordinary measures before from the Treasury. And the reverse repo facility, it's only a standing facility over the last few years. We didn't have it as a standing facility prior to COVID. Now, it had been used as a pressure relief, right? But it wasn't a place that would either provide or drain liquidity out of the banking system in any kind of continuous fashion. That's only a new feature to the Federal Reserve. Now, there has been plenty of communication coming not only from the Federal Reserve, but from mainstream media articles talking about the discount window from the Federal Reserve. And now the discount window is typically a spot that the banking system would not go to get the liquidity. This is what the repo facility is essentially providing at this point, or draining liquidity, however you want to look at it. During COVID or prior to COVID or 2019, it was used as the non-QE QE. But it was the discount window that is the main tool that the Federal Reserve would have to deliver liquidity to the banking system. At some, back in, I don't know, probably close to the Depression era times, the discount window got abused. Banks were borrowing, speculating with that money, throwing it into the stock market. It was really crazy. So it got this stigma that if you go to the discount window, basically you're a bank that's about ready to fail and you can't find liquidity or funding anywhere else, so you're going to the discount window to get it. Now, it's been recently that the Federal Reserve knows that that repo facility is not going to be the tool that they use, and that they're going to have to switch back over to the discount window. And so trying to use that discount window when banks have this belief that if you're going to if they're going to it, then that's like, a sign of bad times. They're creating a situation to try and alleviate or remove that stigma, basically forcing these banks into using the discount window. So now when I think about that, what happens to the repo facility when it's drained? They go over to the discount window, right? Which they have been planning and talking about for quite some time. In fact, we covered a speech talking just about that very thing, So we'll have to wait and see, I mean, I think that that's like something that they've already, have a strategy to deal with. Now, again, like, to what extent, I don't know what that's all going to look like, but to me, like the process is already in motion. Alrighty, guys, I have 14% power left on my phone here. We've been out here for an hour and 35 minutes. It's been a great live stream. I think we covered some really good topics here. 152 people watching with 134 likes. Thank you so much for hitting that like button. We'll give it like another, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes here. My teeth up 99, back of park semi, me 90 something miles per hour. Crazy to be here, but yeah. I don't know what the hell that says. You ever watch Gregory Mannarino? I would have to say he's been spot on about the Fed over years. No, I don't, because I don't believe that he is. Sorry. I don't know Gregory Mannarino to talk about flexible average inflation targeting, the 2% average or moderately above 2% for some time. I've never heard him talk about and I don't really follow him that much, right? That is truly the case. I don't follow him that much, but since he doesn't talk about those particular things, I don't believe that he really understands the Federal Reserve strategy, right? Has he ever talked about the neutral interest rate rising, getting ever closer to the Fed funds rate, and that's the reason why the Federal Reserve is standing still? I mean, I don't think he's spot on about the Fed. I think he's accurate in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to investing money in the market. I think he does a really good job of it, but understanding the Fed's monetary policy as an economist and understanding how to invest money to get a return on that capital, two completely different things, right? That's two completely different things. So I think Gregory Mannarino is awesome at a lot of the things that he does, but if he isn't bringing up some of those topics like I am, talking about the Fed strategy the way I do, I don't think he understands the Fed. Right? In fact, I think that most people, not like literally nobody else understands the Federal Reserve like I do. Right? Now, I believe there are people out there who do, but they're not communicating it on mainstream. They're not communicating it on YouTube. They're not, and if they are, they're not popular. Right? Nobody's listening to them. And so that's an unfortunate situation that the people who are delivering information, who are so-called experts, who are really good at investing, have misunderstood the Federal Reserve, right? And again, just because you're good at investing doesn't mean you're a good economist. And just because you're a good economist doesn't mean that you're good at investing. Those are two completely different things. Right? And I understand that a lot of people would see it as the same thing. It's not. It's not. Right? All right, we'll give it just a few more minutes here and we're going to go. All right. Traders mostly think economists are jokers. Yeah, they do. All right. And I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. In fact, most economists think that economists are jokers. And it's funny. They have a nice joke. That was just like you put three economists in a room. The only thing you can get them to agree on is that the other one is wrong. Right? That's the only thing you'll get them to agree on. And that's the case for pretty much all economists out there. They all have their own theories. They all have their own belief systems. They all have their understanding of what it is that's going on within the economy. And it's all based off of what they had learned throughout their life, just like everybody has. What's funny about me being different is that I never learned from anybody. Right? I never went to school. I never took a class. I never had a mentor. I never, any of that stuff. Right? My whole learning process was What is a mortgage-backed security? What is a credit default swap? What is fractional reserve banking? What is? And I just kept learning from that way. Right? Just kept asking questions and kept, researching. I would read a Federal Reserve speech and not understand anything that I was reading. And I would read it over and over and over again until I finally broke down what it was that they were trying to communicate inside of it. Sometimes it would take me weeks, right? A month of reading the same speech over and over again. I mean, hell, I'd read the same speeches over and over again on this channel. But once I had started to recognize that there was a situation that was occurring within the Federal Reserve's communication literally over 20 years ago that is still playing out today, it led me to understand that it's not a political issue. It's not a New World Order issue. It's not all these other things that are happening out there that a lot of people want to give it credit for. It's a much tighter focus than that. And then once you start seeing it in that form, like once you start recognizing their communications about it and how they have split this communication into two forms, one to deliver to the mainstream and the other that they're delivering to the other central bankers. Once you recognize it in these two forms, you can see people talking the mainstream media narrative. Everybody, like literally everybody out there. I mean, I go to the economic conventions and stuff like that. There's very few people up there who are talking outside of the mainstream media narrative. Yeah. Most of them have really good, accurate, deep information that is not accurate it's accurate in the facts of it, but it's not accurate to the strategy. I mean, people I know personally, spoken on stage with them, stuff like that, using lumber, the price of lumber, to describe the devaluing dollar. They were so sure of it. And here I am saying, oh, that was a terrible mistake. That was a bad mistake, using lumber to recognize the inflationary scenario due to a devaluing dollar coming from the Federal Reserve. That was a terrible mistake that they made. And I don't know how many economists I saw doing it. And when I told them differently, they looked at me like I was strange. They said, how? What? It's not? And I said, no, it's a supply chain breakdown that's happening within the lumber industry, and you're going to see lumber go back down to normal. They couldn't understand it. They could not fathom that. They couldn't recognize why. Yeah? And so when I'm sitting over there going, don't think about the money printer, think about the supply chain breakdown of it. That's the problem. They couldn't. They just couldn't do it. So much attention to the money printer go burr, prices go up. They couldn't see it any other way. And since they couldn't see it any other way, they missed it. They missed it terribly. Meanwhile, the uneducated economist was going, well, got that one right again, right? And I don't mean to be like, again, kind of like arrogant or sounding like that, but I was so frustrated at the time trying to explain to people what was truly happening within lumber, and just to have people just turn around and go, man, you don't know nothing about the Fed. And I'm thinking, man, are you going to come back and apologize to me? Probably not. You're probably just going to abandon the channel and never listen to anything that I have to say after that. And you will be forever lost in what it is that's truly going on. That's what I really felt was happening out there. So I appreciate every one of you who stick around here. 152 of you right now who are getting this information that really nobody else is going to be discussing. Like, how many else are going to have a conversation about this? Nobody. Only here. Only on this channel do we have a conversation about the topics that we are covering coming from the Federal Reserve. How many other people are talking about flexible average inflation targeting, monetary policy with 2% inflation that's running moderately above 2% for some time? How many people are talking about any of this stuff? Neutral interest rates, how it's moving up, getting ever closer to the Fed funds rate, making the economy less restrictive. Here we are wondering why we have a resilient economy, and the uneducated economist was explaining it over a year ago, saying this was going to happen, how we were going to be in a recessionless recession. They were calling it a soft landing. Whatever you want to call it, I don't care, right? But it's, Simon, I think this is something you've talked about before, probably, but why doesn't the money printer cause inflation the way people intuitively expect it to? Oh, that's a really good question, Brody. Well, let's think about it for an example, because I think it's probably easier to recognize it. when there was mass money printing, but we didn't get the inflationary scenario. Right? So quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 took the Fed's balance sheet from $850 billion to over $4.5 trillion. It was a quadrupling of the balance sheet, right? So if there was a money printing that was taking place, it was by far more taking place during the great financial crisis than had taken place just recently during COVID. Now, the dollar amount was more during COVID, but on a percentage basis, it was by far more taking place back in the great financial crisis, the quadrupling of that money, of the balance sheet from the Federal Reserve. Here's the problem. Most of that money ends up on the big bank's balance sheet. And unless that money is lent into the system, it doesn't chase goods and services. Now, it does get into speculative assets. You'll see stock market, bond market, housing market, stuff like that. All those things start to move up because those are speculative assets that people are borrowing money to buy. So with that borrowed money, it moves into those particular assets. You see the inflationary scenario occurring in those. But our day-to-day lives, our wages, the products that we buy, stuff like that, it doesn't experience that same inflationary scenario as the asset prices did. Right? And it's because of just that situation. Most of it sits in the big banks unless it's lent into the system. Now, here, this time around, we had a situation with the quantitative easing, loaded up the big bank's balance sheet, but then that money was deployed into the system with stimulus checks. Very different than what had taken place during quantitative easing. So a lot of people will use that right there. They'll say, aha, bam, the money got into the system. It wasn't even lent into the system. Well, it was in the sense that the government borrowed it, but then handed it out, right? The people didn't borrow it themselves. They were able to get this money. It was that stimulus money right there that created the inflationary scenario. Very inaccurate. It does create a flash in the pan scenario. True, right? All of a sudden, all these people have money. They go out there and they spend that money. That spending of all that money all of a sudden starts chasing the goods and services, and then all of a sudden you have an inflationary scenario that comes from it. But it is a very short-lived inflationary scenario because the money runs out. If it was continuous, right, those stimulus checks were coming every single month from now, continue even till today, we would have that continuous inflationary scenario happening from it. But it was a very quick flash in the pan. However, the breakdown of the supply chain had taken a very long time to repair. And because of the supply-demand imbalances, we had an inflationary scenario that occurred from that. That took forever to repair. In fact, it never did quite get back to the way that it was. It was still in a form of disrepair, even leading up to right now with the idea of tariffs kicking in. It's still breaking that supply chain down, right? It's not free-flowing like it once had. And so with an elevated broken supply chain, and you have supply-demand imbalances, you're going to have an inflationary scenario that occurs from it. It's the money printing gave the psychological impact to the people that they needed in order to have the inflation expectation be persistent going into the future. That part I agree on. Right? That money stimulus, it does have an inflationary pressure, but it's very short-lived, so long until the money runs out. Right? Once the money is gone, the rich have it, separation between the rich and the poor, people are back to being broke again and no money spent, right? This is going, then, equilibrium is found within the supply chain again. However, if you have a broken supply chain and it never does get repaired, then you can have supply-demand imbalances running persistently into the future and have an inflation expectation that remains elevated. This is what's really going on within the economy. The money printer doesn't do it. It does give the ability for an inflationary scenario to occur, but the fact that the money printer goes off is not a fact that it's going to cause inflation. If that was the case, we would have seen it happen back in the quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4. We have to look at it from the supply chain breakdown because that's really where prices are found. Supply versus demand. Right? And with some broken supply chains, then it's going to have an imbalance in the supply-demand factor. If you have ever-increasing amounts of stimulus, then you could have an inflationary scenario coming from the money printer and helicopter money. But if that isn't continuous, once that's over, it's over. And you'll go back to the way that it was. All right. It all started at Jekyll Island, and the nail in the coffin was 1971 Nixon shock. Well, no, I think that was the result of the problem that we were facing, which was We had a manufacturing base in this nation, which was the most magnificent the world had ever seen. We produced the world's greatest stuff. We sent it out there to the world. The world sent us their gold. We increased our standard of living. It came time to then relinquish that gold back out there to the rest of the world because we were buying the foreign products and no longer producing it for ourselves on a reasonable manner. And Nixon said, no, thank you. We're not going to give you the gold. We're going to sever ourselves from the gold standard, and you can use these fiat currency and U.S. treasuries in place of gold. How about that? Okay. And if they didn't do that, we would all have fallen into poverty and misery. Now, whatever, have we done it? That's cool. I mean, I'm like, either way, like I'm down for it. Like, I mean, if you want to end the central banking system, go back to a gold standard, I'm down for it. Let's do it, man. Like, I mean, I think I can handle myself in that sort of, economy. I've thought about it quite a bit. I think I'm in a position in which that I might be able to take advantage of a situation like that. Most people will lose out. They will fail miserably. They will fail miserably. Alrighty, guys. My battery's about ready to die, but I can see that we have, what was it, about 144 people watching, 151 likes. Thank you so much for joining in on today's live stream. It was a lot of fun talking this stuff. I love breaking down monetary policy. I don't, again, like, I know I kind of come off as, kind of aggressive and, I don't know, I don't mean to sound it, but cocky or whatever, but it's not me trying to be like, I'm better and smarter than everybody else. What I am trying to do is share information that I feel nobody else is really talking about. And at times I feel like that is very frustrating when I see other people out there who are incredibly intelligent, who know the Federal Reserve, but yet they don't seem to communicate some of the things that I'm talking about. Taken into consideration, right? 2% average inflation rate over time. What were the three things? The fact that interest rates are not the important tool for the Federal Reserve, right? It's more about the communications. And then what was the last thing? My phone's about ready to die, and I can't think of what the last thing we were trying to warn about already. Anyway, uneducated economist, you guys let me know. What was it? I forgot. Oh, the neutral interest rate. That's right, the neutral interest rate that is rising. Those three things, right? Very important. Go listen to all your YouTube economists out there, all the people that are like the awesome people, because I know they're good. I know they're good, right? They're my friends. I mean, I've hung out and been to many conferences and stuff like that with them. Go listen to them and listen for those three things, right? Flexible average inflation targeting with 2% or moderately above 2% for some time. The fact that their forward guidance is more of the profound tool than the monetary policy interest rate adjustments is, and the neutral interest rate. Those three things. Go listen for those. All right. Uneducated economists, you let me know.